Really nice to be able to join all of you this evening. And a lovely topic to take up. I would probably say it's the topic of our times, um, hope in our resilient hearts. And there's a number of different things that came to mind when I was thinking about this topic, particularly at a time when we're challenged with not having any hope, or having little hope in everything around us and potentially in ourselves as well. And I know that as situations change and as circumstances change, the one thing that we're all experiencing is uncertainty. And any form of uncertainty can create challenges at my mental and emotional stage. And I feel at this time, one of the things that we can really learn is to develop a relationship with ourselves, and certainly experiment and develop a relationship with the Supreme. So for me, I wanted to take up a number of different topics that kind of threads everything together. Oh, my video's gone off. Bear with me a second. I'm just going to put myself back on. I just wanted to thread a few things to kind of bring everything together. And I feel that this work on our hearts is probably a good starting place. And we have this wonderful expression, um, look into the mirror of your heart. And I really love that. That comes up in our Murli quite a lot, because it really speaks to us about what we have to do personally in taking responsibility when we're faced with difficult situations. And whatever situations we're faced with, whether it's relationships, whether it's aspects of my past I haven't found peace with, whether it's current challenges, whether it's situations, whatever it may be, when it begins to affect us on an internal basis, then we will create volumes and volumes of thoughts, but we will be affected at an emotional level. And I know from my own experience on this journey that when situations do affect us at the level of our hearts, and I mean they affect us and it creates feelings internally, then it becomes very difficult to do that inner work on ourselves, and to be kind and caring towards ourselves. Because in that moment, we become so laser focused on what has created those feelings. And so we become so outward focused, whether it's someone hurting us, whether it's a situation that isn't going particularly well, and we keep having thoughts about why this is happening. And in that volume of thought, actually we create more emotional turmoil, and it probably leaves us very drained. I know that from my experience. I'm sure most of you can recognize and relate to this, that when something repeatedly affects us in the way that we create volumes of thoughts, but also emotions and feelings, then it becomes very difficult to find and find that stability and that balance internally again. And often this requires us to understand one of the basic principles of spirituality, which is that it's nothing to do with anything out there. It's everything to do with what's happening inside. And whatever the scene is that's happening outside, it's only triggering the pattern inside of me. And I think when we become laser focused on not that which is outside, but that which is inside, then I can actually begin to take some level of responsibility and care towards myself. And sometimes, I know from my experience, sometimes having the space from whatever is creating that inflammation is healthy, because it's a bit like, when you're walking and you've got a trapped nerve on your foot. Each time you keep putting your foot on the floor, it's going to hurt. And it's the same, that when something is inflaming us internally, the more we expose ourselves to that, the more it will just keep inflaming us. And in order to really begin that process of restoring our hope, because the connection for me is that when something wears us down, one of the first things we begin to lose is a lot of spiritual strength. And when we lose a lot of spiritual strength in a short space of time, we begin to feel vulnerable. You know, it's a bit like when we're tired, we're vulnerable, right? And when we're low in spiritual strength, we are internally tired, internally lethargic, and we begin to lose not just the strength, but we begin to lose our connection with ourselves in that way. And so for me, when I recognize that I am vulnerable, it means that I'm weak. You know, I haven't got spiritual strength to be able to face situations. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned so hard to keep looking outward that it's such a habitual pattern inside of us that doesn't help us to change. And so in that vulnerable state of fear, of anxiety, of anger, we begin to focus on what we need to do. And we don't have the confidence. I know when I went through situations and I'm trying to take control of a situation, but internally I have felt, I felt affected. One of the first things I lose is my ability to trust myself. And I think in order to really restore that feeling of self-faith and that self-confidence inside of us, we have to take real ownerships of what's happening in our heart space. Yeah. And one of the first things that we commence with on a spiritual journey is honesty, is this topic of honesty and internal cleanliness. And I know that one of the first rules that I was aware of that I'd never previously heard until I came to the Brahma Kumaris was the first law of spirituality, which is that we are beings of non-violence. And one of the first laws of spirituality is to not give sorrow, but also not to take sorrow. And I know that all of us will recognize that to give sorrow is a crime, a spiritual crime, that only affects us. But how many of us know that taking sorrow is just as bad, if not worse? And Dadi Janki once shared a really interesting definition of what it means to take sorrow. And it was really simple. She said, taking sorrow is a sign that I've allowed my feelings to be broken. And it was such a profound amount of wisdom in such a short sentence that it made me realize that in all of these different situations that I'm facing in life, each time a situation rocks me internally, I'm taking sorrow. I'm taking sorrow from that situation because that situation is dictating how I feel. And so that situation is influencing me at that level. What I also learned is that when we eventually increase our spiritual stage, we stop taking sorrow from these situations. That doesn't mean that the situation has disappeared. No, it's very much there. But now it affects me less. And it affects me to a point where I can, it affects me to a point where I can still begin to deal with it. And I think this is where our spiritual strength will help us deal with and face situations outside of us. And I also know one of the other things that I've taken a lot from on this spiritual path is a recognition that if we're beings of non-violence, our very core nature is one of peace. And if that is my stability, if peace is my constant frequency of stability and my default nature, then anything that breaks my peace is sorrow in some form. And that again, I found quite profound because it was such simple wisdom that obviously my experience of peace should be constant. And yes, my journey to my real self will take a bit of time to get to level of constancy and consistency, but restoring myself back to my place of peace is of utmost importance. And I also feel that this word resilience comes in at this point for me, because to be resilient means to be able to bounce back from something quickly, our ability to recover from something. And when we're affected, we don't realize how deeply we carry these feelings of negativity and how they actually affect us at a much, much deeper level. And often we can go years, if not decades, of carrying a tremendous amount of sadness. And we don't necessarily even realize that we're carrying it, because this form of internal, I'd say this internal state of being affected is largely anger. Yeah, very much anger that is affecting us. And I can give you a simple example. You know, if you have a regret about a particular situation, you know, maybe something in your life, an opportunity that you've missed, then you'll often find yourself replaying that situation back. And it's very easy for us to blame ourselves when we have regrets. But when we have regret and we're directing blame towards ourselves, a part of us is creating anger inside of us. Actually, that is all creating anger inside of us. So our heart is being affected. And when these deep feelings of negativity exist inside of us, actually it just carries a tremendous level of sadness. So where I've allowed my feelings to be broken, sadness will be present. And where there is sadness, our inner strength just automatically evaporates. So we're unable to face or deal with any situation. And an example I can give you is that I remember watching a short clip of a vulnerable animal. This little dog was under a car, and you know, clearly it had been abused in its life, and it was trembling. And in that state, no matter what somebody was trying to do to help it, it just couldn't trust that, because it had been worn down internally. So it wasn't able to accept help because it was vulnerable. And, you know, in order for us to accept help, we need to help ourselves first as well. And that example really showed me that in this state of being vulnerable, because I've been affected by situations in my life, it wears me down to a point where I lose trust in myself and I lose trust in everything around me. And when we begin to lose trust in ourselves and everything around me, we kind of move into a space of disheartenment and eventually hopelessness. And these are dark places to be. But initially we can recognize some of the signs. You know, we may not realize it, but sometimes this sort of stuff starts when we just feel a bit of disappointment. And, you know, disappointment can stem from, you know, a situation that I'm facing that I expected to go one way, but just didn't. But when disappointment kind of keeps happening and I keep repeating that scenario and that situation over and over again, then it will be very easy to become disheartened. And disheartenment, again, is a place that we can generally recover from if we're able to see the signs. But if we allow these thoughts and feelings to keep going, then actually it will ultimately lead to hopelessness. And the first thing it begins to erode is our ability to function with confidence and with faith in ourselves, with real conviction. And so when we're faced with different opportunities, we can't see them. When we're faced with different challenges, it affects us and we become very sensitive to anything around us. And I feel this is where we can begin to take control of ourselves, because if we look at what's happening in the world around us, we're getting to a point now where uncertainty is affecting our lives in such a way it's bringing out feelings of sadness inside of us, and it's affecting us at a feeling level. And when we carry this burden of heaviness, if you like, then it's quite a draining thing to be able to take, to be able to go every day carrying that feeling of heaviness and not seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And that for me is what hope is. Hope is seeing light at the end of the tunnel. No, when we're able to recognize that I am recovering from something and I am on the right path. But what it absolutely does need is an injection of brutal honesty. And I feel honesty is the number one virtue for self-progress, because without a level of honesty, we can't actually communicate with our hearts. It's not possible. And honesty really allows us to emerge answers and find acceptance in situations easily. And the thing I've recognized in my journey with the Brahma Kumaris is that honesty doesn't require us to think, it just requires us to be in silence. And when we're in silence, we can really begin the healing process of recovering and getting back to where we are and just raising our spiritual strength. And if any of you find yourselves being affected in this way, then one of the first courses of action really are to invest wholehearted attention on my recovery. And it's the way I sometimes describe it is, if you were opening a door and you trapped your hand in a door, it's going to hurt. And when that pain affects your hand, what are you going to do with it? You will find yourself caressing it. You may put some lotion on it. You may put some deep heat on it. You may put some ibuprofen, whatever it takes, but you will find yourself instantly dealing with pain at a physical level. So why is it that at an emotional and a mental level, when we recognize the signs of pain, do we not address it directly? And maybe sometimes we don't know how. Maybe sometimes we've just got into this habit of suffering and we're managing our suffering and we haven't quite hit rock bottom, but we feel like we're just surviving life. But I think a lot of people, when they suffer, they enter into three modes. And I know this from my own experience again. And one is that we can be suffering, but we just don't want to go there. As in, I don't want to go anywhere near what's actually happening inside. So there is a recognition at some level that there is some suffering, but there is almost like a state of being in denial, that I just don't want to acknowledge it. And I think it's really helpful to be able to look at ourselves and understand where we are in these states. So one is in denial. The second is maybe a feeling of being trapped. You know, sometimes we can be suffering and we know we're suffering, but we don't necessarily know how to get out of it. And that makes us feel very trapped in life. And I know that in my own journey, I've experienced that as well. And the third is an interesting one, which is we are suffering and we know what we need to do, but we just don't want to do it, or we don't think we can do it. And that for me is, in some ways, I'm going to use a term that may sound a little bit harsh, but it's truthful. It's being ignorant, knowing exactly what I need to do, but I choose not to do it. And so we will find ourselves in one of those three buckets at any point when we're in this mode of suffering, or we're experiencing challenges and suffering in our life in some form. Being in denial, being feeling of being trapped, and being ignorant to what I really need to be doing. And so I feel that's often a good starting point when when I'm commencing this journey of just acknowledging what's happening inside of my inner world. And it's actually okay, even if you're not ready to face it, but even just stating that I'm in denial myself is honesty. That and I think that opens the door to the next step, because often we need to acknowledge these things to ourselves to recognize that, what, I'm not ready to face this at this point. And yes, I will continue with life, but at some point I will need to face it. And that's okay too, because we all have a point at which we can address what we need to address. And I feel the longer pain continues, the worse it becomes, because, and we can see this now, particularly with the pandemic and loneliness creating sadness, people being affected in all sorts of different ways and feeling very trapped and not necessarily seeing how they can get through it in any way. They're so affected by the external changes around them. And so recognizing this, one of the things that I'm also aware of is that when pain goes unchecked for a long period of time, then actually it can lead to mental and emotional breakdown. And when we begin to experience mental illness in the form of depression or other mental disorders, then actually it becomes very difficult for us to take control and start to make choices about our well-being. We have to then rely on external support to be able to guide us out of it. But if we are not at that stage, and we can experience and feel suffering in our lives, then it gives us a warning shot, doesn't it? It gives us a warning shot to say, actually, I need to rebalance everything in my life and spend time with myself. And in that spending time with myself, we can begin to heal and restore hope. And I know from the experiences we've had over the years of running retreats at the Brahma Kumaris, the retreats that we run at the Lighthouse Retreat Center or Global Retreat Center are normally no more than a day and a half. People come on Friday evening and leave on Sunday. And having given themselves that time and space to be guided exclusively to look after themselves, massive transformation takes place for most people, because just being in an environment of meditation and quietness allows a lot of clarity to emerge internally, allows a lot of honesty to be revealed naturally. And honesty isn't something that we need to develop. It's something already inside of us. We just need to activate it. And it just needs the right environment to be activated. And where there is the noise of constant thought and what I need to do and how I need to fix it, and why is it still happening, all of those questions, then actually we can't begin to really connect with our hearts in that moment. And having that space and silence gives us that first ability just to listen. And I feel this is where healing starts, is not creating thought or additional thoughts of how I can fix it, because that's ego. Ego only wants to fix, whereas the soul only wants to understand. And when we go through this process of just being with ourselves in silence, it's funny, isn't it? All the expansion of everything I'm talking about, and the answer is silence. I find that the simplest answer to everything. Just spend time being with yourself in silence. And I know that when people come to the retreat center, one of the signs that this process is really working is that there will be some discomfort. And maybe some of you have already experienced that in your own journeys in this way, but often people tend to give up when there's discomfort. And I find that discomfort is a really healthy thing, because we know that something's beginning to shift. And the best analogy I can give you is that when you get a tablet to heal yourself, sometimes the sickness needs to erupt first before healing can truly take place at a physical level. And it's the same. It's the same for the soul. When we give the soul the care and attention of kindness and love and the space, then actually we oxygenate the heart, if that makes sense. And there was a lovely expression someone shared called backdraft. Some of you may have heard this, but backdraft is when, a fire receives, when you open a door and there's a burning fire internally and it receives fresh oxygen and it creates an explosion. And it's the same in some ways for us, that if we haven't been doing this work regularly and we've just been caught up in doing and suffering, and we haven't connected with our hearts, then one of the first experiences is this feeling of backdraft. But actually, I see it as a positive. I see it as a means to really know that actually something is beginning to shift. And we often see that within a space of a day and a half, people go from heaviness on their faces to absolute lightness. And I think that there are three signs. So one is that there is this discomfort. So it's a sign that things are working. The second sign for me is that this process has worked, particularly, is that there will be natural acceptance and realization. So first there will be realization, and then there will be acceptance. And all it takes is, some reflection to be able to realize where I've taken sorrow in these situations. And we're not here to fix any situations. We're just here to make peace with them and change the energy. And often, because we end up resisting situations by constantly asking why, we're forever in a space where we're just not accepting them in any way. And where there is acceptance, there will be a constant battle internally that just wears me down. And so it's difficult to then have hope in our hearts, isn't it? It's difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's difficult to be resilient because I'm still in that mode of suffering. And another sign is that when I'm free from the heaviness of this burden, then there will be lightness and happiness. So those are three signs that if you were to take yourself through a process and spend time with yourself exclusively, then you will see those three signs. So the first sign is a bit of discomfort. Yeah, you may feel more tired than usual, you may feel more emotional than usual when you're starting this process, but that's a healthy thing. The second sign is realization and acceptance. It will be very natural. And the third sign is that the heaviness has shifted, will be lightness. And I know that you can't just get to that point straight away. You first have to start at a point where we begin to appreciate ourselves, because when something wears us down repeatedly, we lose sight of anything good inside of us and around us. So one of the first things it does is it poisons our ability to see our own value in any way. And often we can't go directly into seeing our weaknesses because it will only create more heaviness inside of us. I've always had someone ask me the question, but isn't that being honest? And I often said that if you're looking at your weaknesses and it makes you feel more heavy about yourself, and then that isn't honesty, that is being more self-judgmental, because it's creating heaviness inside of you. And so often a starting point is to see the good in me, the value in me, appreciate the little things that I have, appreciate that I may be going through something, but it will change and it is here to teach me something. And when I'm able to develop this relationship with a situation and a challenge that is more about learning about myself and my own relationship with God, then I feel we can really transform situations. Because when we're faced with the level of uncertainty and change in our life and we're pushed up against it, in that time, there's three things that we really need. We need to lean into our relationship with the divine, with the supreme, with God. We have to have brutal honesty with ourselves. And we then need courage to take one step forward. And I find this is where my relationship with the Supreme has really helped transform situations in my life, where the number one thing that I turn to when I'm going through any challenges that are affecting me or influencing me is to write about them, is to really find that space to ask myself very specific questions. What's bothering you? Where have you taken any pain, and what have you taken any pain from in that particular situation? What do you fear and why? What are you attached to? Often we don't realize that the pain that we're experiencing actually comes from our ego being attached to some situation. And that creates a tremendous amount of stress inside of us. And we don't realize that all of the emotions and feelings that we're creating are our own creation, because at some level we're attached to something, whether it's my opinion, whether it's my belief, whether it's me wanting to control a situation, whether it's my desire to be right, whether it's my desire to prove that I'm better. So many subtle attachments here that we can recognize in situations that can really free us. So asking these sorts of questions can bring not just a lot of clarity, but easy acceptance of the situation. The situation hasn't changed, it's still there, but I'm no longer fighting it. And then my focus is really just to develop and deepen this connection in meditation with myself. So I'm drawing strength from the one above. And without that strength, I'm not able to face situations. And that becomes my means to increase my personal power. And when I'm ready, then I will be able to face whatever I need to face and overcome it easily. But one of the biggest things that we get to very early on, or that when you begin that honest work, you will get to soon, is acceptance. And I know that I experienced disheartenment at one point in my spiritual journey. And it was just such a tiring feeling that I carried for a number of years. And when you carry disheartenment for a number of years, eventually you just begin to feel like there is no hope. And it requires us to really see ourselves, because when that level of sadness exists, it's like a blanket over us. It doesn't allow us to see anything with optimism. And not just that, but we see everything through tired lens, through tired eyes. And also that, when we are to that extent affected in that situation, our capacity to be honest just doesn't exist, because we're so focused on that which is outside and not what is inside. And so that this turning attention to looking after myself and paying exclusive attention to myself raises my spiritual energy. And then at the right time, I have the strength to let go of whatever I need to let go of. So that creates hope, because I'm now making and doing the right things to care for myself and to put myself first, to heal and to feel energized and to feel like myself originally. And I think that's the secret to not just healing, but to then realizing that I never want to go through this again. Because when you've fallen, it takes, for the first couple of times, it takes a little bit longer to get back on the horse. But once we recognize that, we get stronger. So each situation that we face, we get quicker to bounce back, because we follow and have faith in a particular process that's working. And that starts with me looking inside. That starts with me developing honesty. That starts with me spending time with myself in silence. That starts with me communicating with the divine. And once we've let go and found that space of acceptance, then the energy changes. And it's funny, when energy changes, situations get resolved. I know in a relationship once where I was holding negative energy at a very subtle level towards someone. You wouldn't have even realized that, or when I was with somebody, it was that subtle that that vibration could be felt by that other person, and they would respond, in their attitude back to me. But as soon as I let go of that feeling in my heart towards them, I didn't even have to say anything to that other person. That other person responded to me in a positive way. So the power of vibration is incredible because it can transform situations. And when a situation has a hold over us, it influences us energetically and vibrationally until we reverse that and bring positive energy and courage and honesty and acceptance, and find solutions to change that situation. So we then become we then find solutions to be able to overcome the challenges that we're facing in our lives. And so I think it's a healthy way to grow, because on a spiritual path we can't grow until, or we can't really find ourselves until we face these difficulties. And until you're on a spiritual path, you can't appreciate difficulties as a means to grow. Yes, we can say them, but when they're affecting us, we can say that, but when we're being affected by situations, we can easily become so focused on what's creating them and turn blame outwards rather than taking that personal responsibility. So I just thought maybe it's time to pause, because I've covered a reasonable amount so far, and it'd be nice just to have a few minutes of meditation, guided meditation. So I'd like to invite you all just to join me for a few minutes in a short meditation, and then we can have questions. Om Shanti. So let's all just take a deep breath in. Slowly release. And now just breathe normally. And with each breath that you take, just feel any tension across your body slip away. And just feel that your body is completely relaxed and settled. And now just turning your attention to the center of your forehead. Just put yourself in a little room behind the eyes. And just become aware of this physical body as you look out through the window of your eyes. And as you recognize yourself on the inside, just become aware of everything on the outside. And in this space, you are completely present in this moment. Your life is in this moment. And in this moment, there is no past and there is no future. There is only now. Let me now create a thought that I am a being of peace, and that peace is my religion. And I just hold this thought in my awareness and instantly connect with this quiet, safe space inside. I am a being of peace. My thoughts are here in this moment. And as I experience this quiet contentment growing inside of me, I feel grounded. I feel safe. I feel protected. And I can see that I am this being of light, a tiny star. And I control this complete physical instrument. But in this moment, I am separate. And I feel detached from this physical costume. And now I just turn my attention up above. I turn my attention to the Supreme, a point of constant love, a sparkling soul. You just feel the rays of the Supreme upon you. And in your relationship with the Divine, soul to soul, you can connect and charge, raise your spiritual strength at any time. All I need to do is to detach from the drama of life and connect with my true self. And when I connect with my true self, I see truth. I can see with honesty. And I can listen. I can listen to my heart. And cleanse it. And strengthen it. And all I need to do is to be truthful and honest with myself and with the Supreme. And I will receive all the help that I need. Shanti.
Thank you, Ash, for the wonderful and enlightening talk. Going into the depths of how honesty is the number one virtue for self progress was very enlightening, and also how the healing process within us begins when we go into silence. So now we have a few questions. The first question is, so you mentioned about taking control of things. How do we do that?
Sure. Yeah, often we try and control things that we can't necessarily control. So I guess it's when it comes down to taking control of ourselves, then the only things we can control are our thoughts and our feelings. And the first thing I have to do is acknowledge my suffering. I have to acknowledge that there are certain feelings I'm experiencing here, and I just have to write them down. And writing is a good tool to get to know yourself. And I've found it incredibly helpful to just be able to emotionally dump on paper. And so taking control needs me just to have the respect for myself, to ask myself questions in a friendly way, and to develop that relationship of friendship with myself so that I can care for myself just like you would a friend who's going through pain. If your friend was hurt, then you'd be asking them questions. You'd be saying, well, what is it that I can do? You'd be trying to comfort them. In the same way, we have to create that feeling for ourselves. And it's not necessarily easy if we haven't known how to, but our natural capacity to care for ourselves becomes active when we just spend time with ourselves in silence, in meditation. And these are really simple ways to connect with ourselves. Um, yeah, I think that's probably, I can probably expand on that, but I think I touched on that in the talk as well.
Thank you. The second question we have is, so we want to sometimes come out of denial, but it's very hard. So how do we overcome the feeling of denial?
Mm, it's a really good, it's a really good question. You know, when someone's in denial, it's actually really difficult to tell them anything because they can't change. No matter what you say, they'll be in denial. But if you show them, then their mind will change. They will automatically be open. And I remember seeing this clip of someone running a restaurant who was in complete denial that his restaurant was failing. And no matter what his family who were running the restaurant with him was saying to him, he just wouldn't listen. In his mind, he was serving the best food. But he was then taken on a journey to see what good looks like. And when his eyes opened, he saw the example of what good looks like. He began to realize that I've been living a lie. And he knew that, but I think that's the way we end up coping with how we suffer. We end up being in denial. So one of the things that we could do is see examples of change. But also, I feel when we're in denial, we don't necessarily want to go there. We don't want to, because we don't know how to. And sometimes we can be in denial, and but we don't know that it's easy to just help ourselves very quickly by starting somewhere. And often those in denial, if they just took one step, and one step is as simple as bringing change to their routine, then you'd be ready to face whatever you need to at the right time. I hope that answers your question in some way.
Thank you. The third question we have is, so what if you're constantly surrounded by your family? What other methods or ways that you can take time for yourself?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. So one is, if we recognize that we are trapped in a negative cycle of thoughts and emotions and feelings, and I'm low energetically, then it's almost as if we need to create a routine that supports us. Whether we've got our family around us or whether we're on our own, we can do this. And it does require a bit of discipline, but it requires complete focus on the self. And I remember um, working with somebody who was prepared to put in the effort, and I could see a massive result in a short space of time. And this was simply three things that they needed to do. One was, when you wake up in the morning, you say three positive things to yourself, three affirmations of what you, the end state of what you want to get to, but like you are already that. So if you're feeling like nothing's working out for you and that things aren't going well, you can say to yourself that I am a soul that is that has conviction in my decisions and everything goes well. That's one example. So depending on what's going on in your mind, if you wrote three affirmations down, then you could actually just speak them to yourself at the start. Literally, as your eyes open, that's the first injection of thoughts that comes into your mind. The second then is to spend time meditating. So guided meditations become a good way. And if you did this every single day, within a week, you'd notice a massive change. And before you go to bed, if you just acknowledged anything you went through in your heart, so just ask yourself the question, what bothered you? Just that one question. Pick up a pen and paper and write, and then go to bed. And that way you're breaking the cycle of negative thoughts, but you're also giving yourself that respect to spend time with yourself and to acknowledge what's happening in your inner world in a routine. And routine is necessary. Like going to a gym, we need a routine to break the negative thought patterns, because if we don't inject that positive routine, then our negative thought patterns affect us at night before we go to bed, disrupt our sleep and our dreams. And as soon as we wake up in the morning, we start with the last thoughts we had before we went to bed, which are negative, and the first thoughts we have in the morning, which are, I'm tired. And that then becomes the pattern through which the cycle continues. But when we inject positive thoughts at the right moment in that morning and inject an experience of meditation, it changes our day. So I hope that that's practical and gives you some guidance.
Thank you. Now, the fourth question is, how do we let go of regret in our life and in our heart?
Yeah, regret is is a beast that I've had to deal with in my life, and often we have to recognize that where there is regret, there will be blame internally, where I'll be blaming myself. And where I'm creating feelings of blame towards myself, there is internal anger present. And that anger is what's depleting me. That anger is what's affecting me. And so moving on from regret, I have to begin to face that inner rejection. Why am I rejecting myself in this way? And I have to start again by raising my spiritual strength. So using the practices that I've just mentioned, because where there's been regret over a long period of time, there will be low spiritual strength. And at that point, you can't overcome whatever in the past that you want to let go of. You just can't let it go, because when you're low spiritually, letting go becomes nearly impossible. In fact, it becomes impossible. We constantly regurgitate negativity based on what we've gone through, and we just won't be able to let it go. But when our spiritual strength begins to raise, then actually we can be kind with ourselves. We can talk to ourselves in an uplifting way. We can write to release. We can seek help. And this all stems from just changing my attitudes towards myself, knowing that I need to start my journey in order to let it go, and I can't just let it go instantly. And regret will change. And when it does eventually change, because you've found acceptance and you've let go of the heaviness attached to that past burden, then actually there will be a profound level of lightness. that situation will have still happened in the past, but actually it won't pull your mind and your intellect anymore. And that always starts with a lot of self-love, and then some reflective practices of asking myself questions around, what is it that I can learn from that situation? Where am I still taking hurt? What am I attached to in that situation? What do I fear in that situation? So these are good questions to ask yourself once you have raised your spiritual strength and you have begun to see value in yourself. And I think that has to be the starting point. Otherwise, we'll end up being off balance. When you completely see the negative and without seeing any positive, then you've lost balance.
Thank you. So the fifth question we have is, so honesty is not looking at your weakness. If I have to correct myself, if the only way to correct myself is to identify my weakness, can you clarify on this?
Yeah, so what I was saying earlier was sometimes we are depleted, and we can start looking at our weaknesses when we're really low in energy. But actually all we're doing is we're beating ourselves up. We're being hard on ourselves. We'll be looking at our weaknesses, and they'll only be making us feel much lower about ourselves. But when we're truly honest, there will be realization. It will almost be like a feeling of liberation, like an aha moment of, I can't believe I've been living my life in this way. But not just that, that realization will bring the momentum for change, because that's the difference between realization through honesty, which is kind of freedom based, to me seeing my weaknesses and it's making me feel low, and that's more self-judgment. I hope that brings a bit of clarity. And so again, it goes back to raising my spiritual strength before I can do that work, appreciating myself so that I'm balanced in my view. And then when I'm beginning this process of letting go, the honesty that I'm investing in helps me see myself and where I'm taking sorrow. So honesty is completely about where I'm taking sorrow.
Thank you.